now. All right, thank you so much, Dr. Rupp, for agreeing and joining us and sharing with us tonight. I'm going to turn it over to you. Better watch out. There's some crazy things behind you.
Yeah, the zombies are coming, guys and gals. If they start to get too close, let me know so I can get out of here. Okay, Bronwyn, thanks so much. I'm going to put it on screen share. Let's make sure that we've got it and we're up and running. How do we look, gang? Thumbs up?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, here we go. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I am a professor emeritus at the University of Maryland College Park. I'm trained as an insect ecologist. I did my degrees at University of Delaware, Cook College of Rutgers University. I got my master's at Rutgers, my PhD at Maryland, and I've hung around here for 40 some years. I've been a professor, a department chair, a dean, and done various jobs. I teach non-majors biology down at College Park to 18 and 19-year-olds. What a hoot that is. But my primary appointment is to help folks like yourself find ways to manage pests in landscapes, residential, commercial, and business landscapes and city forests with alternatives to pesticides, kind of in sustainable, enduring ways that basically try to get some of the chemicals out and let Mother Nature do what she knows best. So as an extension specialist, that's my primary job. But I'm also very heavily involved in scientific outreach as an extension specialist. I talk on a wide variety of topics, and so it was a real delight to have the opportunity to share with you some stories about insect zombies tonight. Now, I will put in a shameful promotion for my website. It's called Bug of the Week. So if you go to any browser and type in Bug of the Week, it will be the first one that pops up. And guess what? Every week there's a new story, every Monday. And this week, the topic is going to be insect zombies. So there are about 500 episodes in the archive. I've been doing this for about 15 years now. So go to the archives and I think you'll be able to find stories about any bug that you found in the sink, in the basement, outside on your milkweeds, up in a tree, or swimming in a stream. So please avail yourself to Bug of the Week. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, so the topic for tonight, insect zombies. And the theme will be how microbes make zombies of their insect hosts. So to get started, I think we should have a little bit of what I call Zombies 101. Now, I don't know that much about zombies, to tell you the truth, so I had to do a little bit of research on this. I found the origins of zombies actually trace back to African culture, but it really became most famous in the colonies, in the slave trade, and particularly in Haitian culture. Now, what zombies were reanimated dead people. The corpses could be brought back to life under the control of a bokor. This was kind of a voodoo sorcerer. And what he would use was various kind of herbs or tetrodotoxin from the pufferfish or Jimsonweed datura to reanimate these dead people and then gain control of their actions. He would have them do his bidding for good, but also for evil. Now, these aren't the kind of zombies we're going to be talking about tonight. So it's not going to be those kind of zombies. The real zombie kickoff in the modern era came by George Romero in a movie that some of you will remember. I know I sure do. In 1968, Return of the Night of the Living Dead. So these were basically the slow-moving, foot-dragging, brain-eating zombies that most of us are familiar with. But guess what? That's not what insect zombies are. Who can forget in 1982, Michael Jackson? he kind of resurrected or put a new spin on what zombies were in his thriller video. But you know what? Those aren't our zombies either. So what are insect zombies? Well, they're zombie apocalypse zombies. That's what they are. Basically, the zombie apocalypse genre is when you have parasites that cause zombification. Could be a pathogen, a virus, something like this, an alien. They kill their hosts and then reanimate the corpses. And the zombies attack living people. And once they attack those people, they transmit that zombifying agent, and then the people they attack become zombies as well. Right now, my granddaughters, they're 7 and 5 years old. They love zombies, and they run around, chase me and say, I'm going to make a zombie out of you. Maybe they did already. I don't know. So what are insect zombies? Zombie insects are insects infected by an entomopathogen. In other words, a pathogen that attacks insects, or a parasite that alters their behavior and sometimes their morphology, how they look, in ways that benefit that pathogen. That's what insect zombies are. Now, our cast of characters from tonight will include ants, flies, crickets, soldier beetles, and my spirit animal, cicadas. The first story I'd like to tell you about, I've entitled Crickets Committing Suicide. So, most of you are familiar with crickets. We often hear them this time of year. And usually they're kind of hanging out in kind of damp, dark places, chirping at each other, trying to attract mates or trying to scare competitors away. However, the other partner in this is what's called a Gordian worm or a horsehair worm. These are roundworms. They're not annelids. They're not segmented worms. They're roundwoods, and they can grow to be 5 inches in length. As a kid growing up, I used to see these in the watering troughs where they would water your horses, these giant nematode worms called Gordian worms. The other piece of this story is a swimming pool. And I'll show you why this is important in just a minute. But these crickets are going to wind up in a swimming pool. So, to complete their life cycle, the Gordian worm has to be in water. That's where it finds its mate, and that's where it will mature, reproductively mature, and then it will lay its eggs on vegetation growing near water. Crickets, grasshoppers, other insects that graze on these grasses will ingest the eggs of the Gordian worm. Those eggs will hatch inside their bodies, and that worm will develop inside the cricket or the grasshopper, in some cases a spider. Now, the problem for the nematode, for the Gordian worm, is to complete its life cycle, it has to go back to water. So what does it do? Well, what it does is it takes over the cricket's mind. So rather than stay in its typical habitat, the cricket will begin to move randomly, but also towards light. Most of the time, crickets are not going towards light, they're going away from light. Once they're infected, the zombie worm takes mind control and they begin to wander toward light. When they reach a natural water source, like a little pool of water, or a swimming pool where much of this research was done, what the researchers found is once the cricket got to the edge of the pool, it would take a suicidal jump into the water. This is very unusual. Crickets don't do that. And this would be the place where the Gordian worm would emerge from the cricket and complete its life cycle. So zombie mind control changed the natural behavior of that cricket, make it walk towards the light, and when it got to the edge of the swimming pool, jump into that water so it could complete its life cycle. Pretty weird. It's not just crickets that become infested or infected with these Gordian worms. There are grasshoppers, there are spiders, there are other types of arthropods that Gordian worms will zombify to complete their life cycle, developing in the host and then making that host go back to water. One of the most fascinating stories is one involving tropical ants. Now, fortunately, I spend a lot of time in the New World tropics. It's always nice to get out of town in January, February, and March. And I usually head for Belize or Costa Rica, or sometimes the Amazon, to the rainforests. Now, in these forests, we find many different species of ants. Here, we see the bullet ant, the ant with one of the most powerful stings on the planet. Now, while the bullet ant spends much of its time in the canopy of a tree, sometimes to get from one tree to the next, the bullet ant has to move down to the ground. And this is where the pathogen is going to find its way into the ant, is on the ground. The question here is, why do ants take a dive from treetops and bite leaves before dying? Well, the answer is zombie mind control. Now, the best studied case of this involves a carpenter ant. This is a tropical carpenter ant called the golden carpenter ant. They're in the genus Camponodes. And this is the zombifying fungus that attacks the carpenter ant. This is called Ophiocordyceps. You can see the fruiting body of the fungus emerging from the ant. So how does the zombie process go? It goes like this. When the carpenter ant comes down from the tree, normally Camponodes spends its time in the tree canopy. But to get from tree to tree, it sometimes has to descend to the forest floor. And on the forest floor, lying in wait, are the spores of Ophiocordyceps. Once the spores contact the exoskeleton, the cuticle of the insect, they recognize that they're on the ant and it's the right species of ant, and those spores germinate. They then send a hyphae down through the exoskeleton of the insects. It bores in, digests its way through, and once inside, it's going to multiply and turn the internal organs of that ant into a fungus garden. Some of the hyphae will also contact the brain of the ant, and this is where the zombification process takes place and it takes over. After being infected, the ant climbs back up to the top of the tree where it's normally found. But once that fungus reaches its brain, it's zombie time. The ant will then lose control. It tumbles from the top of the tree back to the earth. It actually spasms, it loses control and falls to the ground. It then wanders that slow zombie walk. It goes, till it finds a plant. It will climb up on the plant, and its last living act is to take its powerful jaws and clamp on to the mid-vein of a leaf. It then dies. Inside the ant, the fungus is completing its development, and it produces a fruiting body that emerges like a parasol through the skin of the ant, the exoskeleton, and the fruiting body will then produce spores that rain down on the forest floor and infect other ants. Sometimes these infestations, the zombie fungus, Ophiocordyceps, will kill large numbers of ants and create basically fungus gardens of zombie ants. You can see the fruiting body here coming out of the carpenter ant. This is the fruiting body of Ophiocordyceps. So, takes over its mind, makes it fall out of a tree, walk up a plant, bite on, die, so the spores can then come out and disperse through the environment, infecting other ants. Does anybody recognize this one? I hope so.
Is that a lightning bug?
It's in the family. It's in the same superorder as lightning bugs. This is a cantharid beetle, soldier beetle, also known as leather wings. This is the Pennsylvania soldier beetle, very common on our goldenrods and our composites, usually from June through late autumn. But waiting in the soil and on the plant vegetation is another fungus. This one is called Arianopsis. The spores lay in wait. Now, normally when we see soldier beetles on plants, they tend to be highly active. They're usually on the plant, but they're also running around. They're finding mates. They're flying, active, highly active. And these are beneficial insects. Not only are they pollinators, but the immature stage are maniacal predators that feed on things like cutworms and white grubs down in the soil. So these are highly beneficial insects. Well, once Arianopsis gets inside the beetle, it's time for zombie mind control. The beetle stops its normal behaviors and does the slow zombie walk up to the upper leaves of a plant. This behavior is called summiting. It's like when we climb mountains, we summit, we get to the top. The beetles will climb up the plant to a high point. Again, their last living act is to take their jaws and clamp onto the leaf of the plant. Then they die. Within the body of the beetle, Arianopsis is multiplying and producing fruiting body structures to disperse its spores, but it's got a little problem. That beetle, remember, has elytra. It's got hardened wings that would prevent the spread of the fungus. So what Arianopsis does is cause the wings of the beetle to open, exposing the fruiting structures so the spores can then disperse through the environment. So again, the soldier beetle makes its last salute, spreads its hind wings, and Arianopsis can then disperse through the environment because it's in an elevated position on the plant. We're going to jump over now and talk a little bit about flies and how dead zombie flies can basically deceive their hapless suitors. How can that work? Well, let's look at what flies usually do. These are blowflies on a carcass. Normally, flies are highly active, just like the name says, they fly. They're very active, they move around. However, there's another fungus lying in wait to infect various species of flies. Now, one of the common flies we have here each spring is one called the seed corn maggot. This is an important pest of many of our agricultural crops. And when we have unusually wet springs, cool wet springs, which we frankly have had a lot of recently, these maggots will attack the roots of corn and grasses that are growing. They can be major pests in agriculture. But as these maggots are feeding in the soil, there's another fungus laying in wait in that soil for them. This one is called Entomophora. The spores of Entomophora will cling onto the larvae. They will also be on vegetation and the surface of the soil, and they will be picked up by the flies. Now, just like before with the soldier beetle, those spores will germinate. They will send a hyphae down through the exoskeleton of the fly. Once inside, they're going to multiply and make a huge mass inside the body of the fly. The flies will then stop flying, but under zombie mind control, they are going to summit. They're going to climb up to a high point on a twig or a branch. They're going to attach to it and die. Now, the interesting part of this story, as the fungus develops, it causes the abdomen of the fly to swell grotesquely. Here you can see the swollen abdomen and the fruiting bodies where the spores are being dispersed. However, male flies find female flies with big abdomens to be highly attractive. The reason for this, anybody want to take a wild guess? Well, the reason they like big butts, in the world of insects, usually a larger abdomen indicates greater fecundity. So very oftentimes there will be selection to find a mate who is large, who has a large abdomen, because if you mate with that particular female, she will lay more progeny, more of your genes will enter the population. Okay, so the situation here is, because these flies have unusually large butts, the males say, oh yeah, that's my baby. They mate with her. However, in doing so, that fly is dead. What it does is it ensures additional transfer of the fungus from one individual to the next, because after they try to mate with that female, they will pick up spores and go mate with another and another and another. Now, how clever is that? Pretty clever.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Sure.
Can any of these parasites happen to humans? Like, can any of these get inside humans and take over us?
All the time. I've got one in me right now. It came in my ear last night. And if you see any breaks in this story, it's because there's this worm that's just eating its way through my brain right now. I'm hoping that it doesn't erupt before the end of the night.
Oh, no.
I'm hoping. So if you see a big fruiting body coming out of my skull in a little while, you know what happened. Or if I start doing weird stuff like, okay. No, the good news here is that these are usually pretty specialized.
Okay.
The fungus I've talked about here, the Entomophora, gets on various kinds of flies, but only flies. Okay, those Gordian worms only infect crickets. So you're going to have your own kinds of parasites that can change your behavior if you think about it. What does COVID-19 make us do? What's one of the symptoms of COVID-19 or any upper respiratory cold? What does it make you do?
Cough.
Cough and achoo.
Sneeze.
So what's it doing?
Spreading.
It's zombieizing you. So the rhinoviruses and many of our infections, one of the symptoms is to cough and sneeze. It's attacking your respiratory tract because it knows that's how it's going to get from you to the next person. So we all get made zombies sooner or later, don't we? Okay.
No one's safe.
It's so creepy. No one's safe. You're right. No one is safe. Okay. Now, I'm going to spend some time, I said, with my spirit animal, which are the periodical cicadas. hey, they're going to come in 2021. The big brood is just around the corner. So let's talk a little bit about cicada biology before I talk about zombie cicadas. There's a long history of periodical cicadas here in the United States. William Bradford, who was the first governor of Massachusetts back in 1663, noticed cicadas that were emerging there in Massachusetts. He said it happened all in the month of May, and they were great sort of flies. They didn't really know what these were. They were big like wasps or bumblebees, and they came out of holes in the ground, and they made a constant yelling noise as it made all the woods just ring, and it made the hearers deaf. So if you've lived through a cicada emergence, you know those guys or gals are really, really loud, but they're not really flies and they're not wasps or bumblebees. They're, of course, more closely related to things like aphids. Okay, they're sucking insects. Now, here we have 3 species of 17-year cicadas: Magicicada septemdecim, Cassini, and septendecula. And we can tell these different species apart by their size and their color and their songs. They all have different calls. Let's see if we can listen to one of these. Now, this is my favorite one. This is Cassini. Sounds like little castanets to me. And this is the rarest of the 3 species, septendecula. Sounds like a little cricket. There are also 4 species of 13-year cicadas. And again, these differ in size and color and habitat preference. Where are the broods in our region? Well, next year we're going to have brood 10. Here's where brood 2 is found. Here's brood 14, brood 5. But brood 10 is the largest brood. It'll be found all the way from Georgia to New England and out to Illinois. So this is the largest and most widely dispersed of the cicada broods, and it's coming up next year. What will we begin to see? Well, in the springtime, we'll see mud turrets in the ground. These are how they make their escape from the soil. For 17 years, they've been feeding underground on the xylem tissue, xylem sap of trees, and they'll begin to build these unusual turrets or exit holes from the earth. The densities will be amazing. Here's 1 square foot. There will be 1.5 million cicadas per acre. There will literally be trillions of cicadas that emerge from Georgia to New England. They emerge when soil temperatures reach about 64 degrees Fahrenheit. And we just completed a study that we published in the Maryland Entomologist, and we found they emerged from April till early June, but the real bulk of emergence was in that 2nd and 3rd week of May. So we're really going to see these guys coming out the 2nd and 3rd week of May. They mostly emerge after dark, when it's a little safer so birds and other mammals can't see them. And then they're going to make a mad dash for the trees, where they're going to climb up, they're going to molt, shed their skin, and become adult insects. Then they're going to climb up to the treetops. Okay, it takes several days for their skin to harden. And once they're in the treetops, they'll live somewhere from 2 to 4 weeks, those that survive. And they'll be feeding on the xylem tissue of the leaves and the stems. They have various songs that they sing. This is their alarm call. So if they're under attack by a bird, that's the noise they make. They have a calling song. And that brings all the members, remember there are 3 species coming out. This brings all the members of one species together in the same place. And then they've got a courtship song. And this is how the female will choose her mate. So the males will have a courtship song. And if the female cicada likes his song and likes his dance, and if he has a good line, she will flick her wings. She makes a little clicking sound. And that means she's ready and willing to mate with that particular individual. So I want everybody to remember the female makes the clicking sound, okay? The females will then lay their eggs in what we call egg nests in the tree branches. This is her egg laying tube or ovipositor. You can see her abdomen pumping, and she's pushing eggs into that branch. The eggs mature in 6 to 10 weeks. The tiny nymphs fall down to the ground and they burrow down 18 inches, 2 feet, and feed for the next 13 or 17 years underground on tree roots. So that's the biology of the cicada. Maybe sometime next spring, Bron, when I can come back and give you the full story. Okay, that's just a little capsule. So, question?
This summer the cicadas were louder than my rooster.
Yeah, those were probably the dog day cicadas. Those are the ones that were in June, July, and August.
Ah.
They had a really good year. We have cicadas that come out every year. Those are called annual cicadas or dog day cicadas. And they were super loud. They had a great year.
Yeah.
And these guys and gals are going to have a really great year next year. I promise.
Yay.
Yippee. All right. So now let's see what happens. Let's see what happens when cicadas are infected with a fungal disease called Massospora. I'm going to play you a little video. It's got an audio track.
For 17 years, Massospora fungus has been waiting patiently. As periodical cicada nymphs emerge, the spores cling to their exoskeleton. Sensing that it's colonized the cicada, the spore germinates and sends its hyphae deep within the body of the cicada. As the cicada nymph sheds its skin to become an adult, the Massospora fungus multiplies within its body. The hapless cicada carries Massospora into the treetops. And soon the abdomen of the cicada begins to disintegrate, exposing the fungal fruiting bodies which Massospora will use to disperse its spores throughout the cicada's environment. Despite being functionally neutered, the libido of the cicadas is not diminished. And even though they can't reproduce, they continue to attempt to mate, further spreading the Massospora. Now Massospora becomes an STD and spreads throughout the cicada population. But Massospora has one more trick. It causes infected males to mimic the courtship behavior of females, tempting uninfected males to mate with them. What? How strange is that?
How strange is that? So basically what Massospora fungus does is it makes the male cicada behave like a female. So he will flick his wings, and this is highly attractive to other male cicadas that will attempt to mate with the infected Massospora male. Of course, this is not going to work, but the attempt will cause uninfected males to carry the spores and they will then go off and infect other females and then other males. That's pretty devious, I think. So the mind-altering fungus, Massospora, makes the cicadas continue to move throughout their environment. Even though they're sterile, they will continue to attempt to mate, and the males will fool the other males into trying to mate with them to continue the spread of the fungus throughout the cicada population. Okay, this is what the abdomen of the male cicada looks like. You can see this is the fungal body, the fungal fruiting structure of Massospora. These will produce thousands and thousands of spores that rain down into the environment. And basically, in the second stage of infection, the Massospora will produce resting spores that rest on the surface of the ground for 17 years until the next crop of cicadas emerge, and then they'll reinstitute the infection, and off they go, zombieizing poor cicadas. The interesting thing you'll see next year is when they've been infected, their abdomen will actually fall off, and these cicada zombies will be walking around and flying with no abdomens. Now, how they do that, I don't know, but they'll live for several days without their abdomens, walking around the environment like zombies. All right, so we've learned now how various entomopathogens and parasites turn insects into zombies, but is there tit for tat? Can insects turn other insects into zombies? And the answer, of course, is yes. Here's a really interesting example. Here's the pink ladybird beetle, Coleomagilla maculata. It's a very common ladybug, highly beneficial. It is attacked by a little braconid wasp called Dinocampsis. Now, Dinocampsis will sting the ladybird beetle, and when it stings it, it will inject an egg, but it will also inject a virus called DCPV virus. What happens is this. The little wasp stings the ladybird beetle. The egg of the wasp hatches inside the beetle, and the larval wasp develops within. However, the virus also multiplies within the beetle. After it's completed its development, the wasp larva will bore out of the beetle, but it doesn't pupate on the surface of a leaf or on the ground. The first thing it does is it snares the legs of the ladybird beetle. In other words, it lassos its legs, and then it pupates with the ladybird beetle on top of it. At this point in time, the virus has infected the mind of the beetle, and the beetle becomes hyperactive. So the beetle will then twitch. So if parasites come along, parasites that would like to lay their eggs in the pupal case of Dinocampsis, the ladybird beetle twitching on top scares those parasites away. This allows the wasp to develop. It goes off and stings another ladybird beetle, and it actually turns out that in many cases, after the wasp emerges, the beetle can actually recover and continue to live. The virus declines, the game is over, and then the beetle goes on about its business. So, yes, there are many insects that make zombies out of other insects. Now, can insects make zombies out of other organisms? Well, I think so. Can insects alter plant behavior? Did you guys know that plants have behavior? They do. They bend towards light. They actually respond to environmental stimuli. When an insect begins to feed on one plant, the neighboring plant can detect chemicals that are being released by the plant that is being eaten by an insect, and that plant will actually up its defenses to prevent further attack should that insect come and try to attack this plant. So plants can actually communicate. Plants are very clever. Well, there are many tiny wasps, aphids, and flies that produce abnormal growths on plants. We call these abnormal growths galls. Normally, when we look at a twig of an oak tree, it's supposed to be woody and round. But the wool sawyer gall makes a structure on there that looks like a ball of wool. The horned oak gall makes a structure with these funny little horns on it. The tiny wasps emerge from these little horns. The oak apple gall makes something that looks like an apple grow on the branch of an oak tree. There are literally hundreds of different species of these tiny parasitic wasps called cynipid wasps that basically inject, they create chemicals, phytohormones that control the genetic machinery of a plant and say, don't make a woody stem, make a home for me with horns on it so I can develop, or make something that looks like a ball of wool so I can develop inside it. So these insects, many insects kind of take mind control of plants to change the morphology and the behavior of plants to their own advantage. So insects make zombies of other insects, and insects make zombies of other plants. So with that, I think I've kept it within the 1 hour time frame. Yeah, we're doing good. It's not quite 8 o'clock yet. I wanted to thank Bronwyn and the Natural History Society for inviting me tonight and allowing me to tell some zombie stories with you guys. Be safe out there, wear your masks, and keep an eye out. Don't get in the way of various fungi or parasitic worms, because you don't want to be a zombie unless you want to be a zombie, in which case, go out and find those things. So thank you very much for allowing me to be in your homes tonight and tell you some bug stories.
Thanks, Mike, so much. This was great. We do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
If you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
Okay. So what, and just to let folks know, Mike is going to be coming back in February. He's already promised us that we're going to be doing Cicadas, a Love Story for Valentine's Day. So we had our Halloween with the zombie insects, and we're going to have Cicadas in Love for Valentine's Day. So it's not on our website yet, but stay tuned, and it's coming. Whitney would like to know, is there an effect on the lifespan of infected cicadas?
That's a great question, Whitney. The lifespan of adult cicadas is probably at best a couple, 4 weeks, maybe. A lot of these guys and gals aren't going to make it past the first day. They'll be, in my observation, it can be somewhere between 20 to maybe 10 to 20% are simply going to fail in that last molt from the nymphal stage to the adult. So mortality is going to be very high. Birds and everything on the planet is going to want to eat a cicada, so the mortality is going to be high. I haven't seen data on this. I'm guessing that those with Massospora probably don't get to live like the very full extent of life for a variety of reasons, but they certainly live long enough to be able to spread that fungal disease. And I'm guessing that on balance, their life is probably not significantly shorter than what it would be for your average or your median cicada. So I don't think their life is significantly reduced by that. How you live without an abdomen escapes me, but you know, they seem to be able to do it.
So Nancy's interested in what percentage of the cicadas get the fungus.
It's variable. Again, I don't know what the exact figures on this are, Nancy, but early in the emergence of cicadas, as you might guess, the numbers are quite low. It's only a very small proportion. I would say less than maybe 5 or 10%. But as the season progresses and that fungus begins to become established, it's kind of pretty much like our COVID scenario. Later in the life cycle, you'll see many, many more cicadas, maybe 20 to 30% that have a Massospora infection. So it starts out low, but as that fungus replicates, reproduces and spread, the proportion will go up. It's not like 50%. I've never seen anything like that, but I've seen maybe 15 to 20% of cicadas with Massospora.
Just more on cicadas is Mary's interested. There doesn't seem to be a cicada territory on the eastern shore of the map.
Yeah.
And do cicadas prefer certain trees?
Yeah, you're not going to have them south of, let's see, about southern. Oh, I'm trying to think what the dividing line is over there. Halfway down the eastern shore, what is that? Kent is in the middle somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think once you get below Kent on the eastern shore, you're not going to have them. And in extreme St. Mary's, you're not going to have brood 10 down there. You have other broods down in St. Mary's. So no, you're not going to have them over on the extreme eastern shore. Everywhere else, there's a good chance, but they're also spotty. So where there's been development in agriculture, there are going to be areas, pockets like in Frederick, where there will be cicadas all around, but they won't be in certain locations. So it's not going to be uniform. It'll be patchy. They have a very broad host range. They're going to be most damaging to young saplings. So I'm already advising people not to plant woody trees and shrubs next spring. Delay that planting until next fall. I've also worked with several communities saying don't plant this fall because young saplings are going to be the ones that are most damaged. Hardwoods and fruit trees. They're a major pest in orchards and nurseries. They like many, many different kinds of hardwoods. They're going to love oaks. They're going to love maples. They're going to love hickories. They're going to love elm trees. They're going to love apple trees, peach trees. And this is where they cause the bulk of damage because saplings have so many of their branches are just the right size, about 11 millimeters, 5 to 11 millimeters are just the right size. The big trees are going to weather this storm pretty well, but it's going to be the small saplings. I'm going to follow up for just a second with this. There's going to be kind of an urge, or there will be people that say, oh, I'm going to come in and spray your trees to prevent the cicadas. We've done research, and I'll talk about this. We've shown that the sprays are ineffectual. They're also going to create problems with your pollinators and your other beneficial insects. The very best way to prevent cicada damage is to net your trees. We've demonstrated, and we've done work in orchards and demonstrated that netting is almost 100% effective in reducing the damage on your small saplings. And even if you're spraying every 3 or 4 days, you're still going to have more cicadas coming in. So we're telling people, please don't try to spray cicadas as a way to prevent tree damage.
And you touched on it, but how does the new construction affect the fungus and the cicadas, and does it survive the turnover of soil and the addition of different sods? And
No, that's a grand question, and it's one I have not seen data on, so I'm just going to speculate, but I'm guessing I think, once Massospora is up and rolling, and if an area has had cicadas, and as long as trees and vegetation has been preserved, I think you will see cicadas emerge, and I would guess they will become infected, even if you've laid down sod and things like this. I don't think a change in sod necessarily, or seeding, or lawn renovation would disrupt this cycle. However, if 10 years ago that was a forest and they clear cut it and they took off all the topsoil, as they usually do when they build a new development, I don't think you're having cicadas, and I don't think they're going to have Massospora even if you had them. So I think we've already know that 2 broods of cicadas have been extirpated. There's a brood that's been lost in Connecticut. There's another brood that's missing from Florida. So we know that cicada broods can be eliminated, extirpated, and we think that the primary cause, again, is habitat destruction when we build and we pave the earth over. So yeah, we can lose cicadas. Yeah.
So Dave is interested to know, is the Hesperomyces changes the outward appearance of the multicolored Asian lady beetles? Does it also affect via mind control?
Yeah, the real trick here with the ladybird beetles, and there are several it's not just Coleomagila. This happens in many of our other ladybird beetles as well. As I understand it, it's really the virus that is affecting the nervous pathways in the brain. It's not so much the parasite here. It's not the wasp itself. In some of the other stories I've told tonight, for example, the Ophiocordyceps, the hyphae actually enter and are in proximity to the brain, to the big ganglia inside the ant's head. And we think that's how it controls the mind. In cicadas, the Massospora, there are actually psychoactive compounds that are produced by Massospora that heighten the hypersexuality and the activity of the cicada. But in the case of Dinocampsis, I don't think it's the parasite itself that's changing the behavior. As I understand it, it's actually the virus infecting nervous tissue in the ganglia, the big nerve centers of the lady beetle, that cause the tremors and the shaking, the hyperactive sensitivity.
And that if you could continue on that, because somebody is asking what happens to the brain of the insect that is attacked.
Yeah, really. Well, that's the part of the story that I found pretty fascinating. Apparently, the virus cures itself. We get viruses. Remember, insects have immune systems just like we do. They can get viruses, they can get bacterial infections, and they can clear those things because they have immune function. So it's my understanding that the beetle, after that parasite emerges, they can recover from the infection by the virus and kind of go out business as normal. Now, whether they can reproduce or not is a different story, because remember, their internal organs, many of those, their fat body and perhaps their gonads, have been eaten by that parasite, the parasitic wasp, once it's inside. So whether or not they can reproduce, I don't know, but they can recover mobility and eat and walk and do things like that after that infection.
Mary's interested, do you know anything that turns honeybees into zombies?
There is a story like that. As I was digging through, Mary, I did think I came across one honeybee story, but for the sake of time, I chose to do these ones. So if you look it up, I think you will find a story about and I don't know what the zombification agent is. I don't know if it's a bacteria or a fungus or a virus, but I think I came across a story about honeybees being zombified also. So yeah, Mary, go ahead and give that a shot, and I bet you can find something on it.
I had a question too. You said that the fungus with the ants was species specific. And how can the fungus differentiate one species of ant from the other?
They have receptors. It's just like we differentiate anything, Bronwyn. That fungus contacts the surface and it's actually looking for certain proteins, glycoproteins on the cuticle of that ant. And if they're not there, it's not going to germinate.
And
So they actually they have the ability to recognize their host and know the right host. So if it landed on a worm, for example, those proteins wouldn't be there, it wouldn't germinate. If it landed on a beetle, the surface proteins on that beetle and in the waxes would not be there, it would not germinate. It has to land on an ant for that thing to germinate. There are other species of fungi that are specific to Lepidoptera, to flies, and so on.
And is that because it has the special proteins to get through that exoskeleton that's specific to that insect?
Remember, this is a pretty complex and highly evolved system. Not only does it have to be able to drill through the cuticle, and there may be a standard series of proteolytic and chitinolytic enzymes that can chew their way through there, but then it has to be able to match the environment inside that ant, the conditions, the cells. It has to be able to find its way to the brain and be able to find the right part of the brain to control these behaviors, give it the tremors, have it walk up a plant and bite, latch on to things. So again, these associations are ancient. We're talking about things they've been working on for probably 80 million years. So
Right.
We've got 80 million years of evolution behind us to get us to this point. So once you got it right, you don't want to mess around. You don't want to go jump on a fly if you're supposed to get an ant and vice versa, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And Donna says, what's the point of the cicada? Does it do anything beneficial?
Oh my God, what's the point of a cicada? I love that question. What's the point of anything? A couple years ago, there was a big spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And actually, I went down there and I started to survey all the different creatures that lived in the Gulf of Mexico. And I asked the clam, I said, well, who should be voted off the island? And I asked the lobster, the spiny lobster, I said, well, who should we get rid of? And I asked the dolphin and the flounder, and they say, we got to get rid of the humans. They're messing the place up. So what good is anything? I don't think about good and bad anymore. We're all partners on this planet. We're all involved in a big enterprise and we're interrelated. So what good is a cicada? Well, what good is a cicada? It's going to fill the bellies of hundreds of thousands of birds and mammals that are going to feast on these things. If you want to take the human perspective, the Native Americans, when the cicadas would emerge, it was a bounty of protein. So, I don't know, what's the good of anything? We're all just in this game together. I don't think in terms of good or bad anymore. I just think that creatures and the organisms on this planet, they all have a role to play somewhere in the circle of life. Sometimes they make us sick, sometimes they make us well, but we're all just kind of pulling together in this big game. So I don't know. They're going to be a lot of fun. For me, it's going to be the opportunity to educate people about ecology, behavior, about romance, about herbivory, about predation. It's going to be like having a National Geographic special in your backyard. So for me, it's a tremendous teaching opportunity.
And I think that's a great place to end it for this evening. Now that you have this knowledge, it's the best part of learning something is sharing it with others. So I hope that you take what you've learned and share it with others, and come back and visit us. If not on Thursday to learn about spider webs, sometime in the future with one of our many fascinating programs to feed your and strengthen your curiosity muscle. Thank you. Have a great evening and a great week, and stay safe, everybody.
Thanks. This was terrific. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dave. Glad you enjoyed it. Good to see you, Gene, and everybody. Thanks so much for letting me in your house tonight. Here comes the zombies. Look out.
Thanks, Mike. That was great.
See you guys.
Fascinating as always.
Bye.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you.
See you Thursday, Bronwyn.
Okay, Gene. Looking forward to it.
All righty. Thanks, Mike. It was
Good
great.
to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
coming in.
you.
Eve.
Thank you, Mike. That was fabulous.
All good, Bronwyn?
All good.